welcome everybody into the first ever episode of the Maine Rundown. I'm Zach Tarenko alongside my co-host Jeff Christianberry, and I'm super excited here for the first episode. Going to be a really fun podcast. Before we really get into anything, just want to talk about what we're doing here, why we are on your screens, or if you're listening to us on any of the podcasting platforms. So Jeff and I, long time, I would say he's my longtime mentor. I think it's the best word for it. When I was in high school,
sound nice
at Thornton Academy in Saco, Maine, and then obviously just a great friend of mine. And we wanted to have a podcast, but we didn't really have an idea. And then we started to cultivate this almost idea of talking about Maine sports, but not really just, recapping like, oh, this team won their high school basketball game. It's more going deep into some topics, but also having some really great guests on to help us just kind of talk a lot about Maine sports, really get into, what it's all about and what you might be missing in Maine. So that's really what we're going to be doing here. Obviously, as I said, each week going to have a guest on. Hopefully somebody that is really big in the sports media industry and, who's been in sports and knows a lot about sports. This week, our guest is great, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, we're really excited. Hopefully getting a episode out once a week. And again, the first ever one is right now. At the moment, Jeff and I are in two different locations. I'm at Quinnipiac University in Connecticut, where I attend school, and Jeff's in Saco, Maine, with his very nice camera, as we see here.
College versus pros. That's how it is. Huh?
Yeah, just about. We'll start and get right into it for the first episode. So the first thing that I want to talk about, I'm assuming this is where you're at because we're at that time of year. Late February, we get into high school basketball. I didn't really get to experience it this much or a lot this year because, again, I was at college and just kind of watching through Twitter and looking at the recaps I could see. But I guess I first want to ask you, just seeing some of the tournament this year and what's happened so far. Obviously, the state finals haven't happened yet, but what have you seen from the tournament from these players and the teams?
Yeah, well, first off, I work here at Thornton Academy in Saco, Maine. Now, while we will certainly talk a little bit about Thornton Academy, this will be kind of a general Maine sports one, but we will have a little bit of slant OTA just because of our knowledge. So for me, it's been different this year because both of our teams, our boys basketball and girls basketball team, we're routinely making deep runs in the playoffs. This didn't happen this year. Our girls lost in the quarterfinal round at Sanford, and the boys lost in the regional semifinal against Scarborough. So I only saw one game, but I've been watching a lot of it on the live stream, obviously. I mean, the tournament this year has been pretty wide open, I would say. You look at, there's been some favorites, obviously, but this year in general, we were so, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later too, we were so blessed and spoiled for a couple of years when we had some, not just great players, but all-time great players for the state of Maine that had unparalleled excitement in terms of, social media, in terms of, live streaming, everything. One of the positives that's come out of COVID is some of the coverage, and you can watch pretty much every game that you want to. There are some negatives to that. There are some streaming services that are way better than others, of course. Some that are pay, some that are free. Pretty much every regular season game now, even you can see via YouTube or NFHS or some other systems. So for the tournament itself, it's always a spectacle. One of my 3 rundown segments today is going to be about the venue, so I'm going to not spoil it for that. I think it's been a very solid tournament. If you look at, I'm going to talk about some of the teams that are in states. There are some familiar faces and some brand new faces, which are really cool. For my gathering, if we're being totally honest, and we'll try to be as honest as we can here, not the most exciting tournament that we've ever seen. If you just look at, I'm not talking about the stories about we'll talk about Wyndham going to the state championship for the first time ever, exciting, but the actual games themselves, which is ironic because this was the first year they actually had at some of the venues a replay official to look at buzzer beaters just in case we had any like we did last year. It's a lot of exciting games last year. This year, not so much. There were definitely some close games, but very few overtime games. I don't think there's any real buzzer beaters. So it's just, it's not about the quality of the basketball. It just happened to be, I think, a lot of teams that were really kind of the upper echelon and not. So for me, is it a memorable tournament? No, not for Thornton Academy, not really doing so well in the boys or the girls, but just not many signature moments. Maybe we could see some this weekend, and also not having any of those signature players, not just guys like Cooper Flagg and JP Estrella, which we'll talk about too, but some of the other, if you talk about who's Mr. Maine basketball, who's Miss Maine basketball, there's nobody really going to these high-end schools this year. So But a tournament's always great. It's a great way to spend your vacation week, going to the Expo or the CIA or Augusta or Bangor. But yeah, it's been a fine tournament. I'm really hoping for some great games to watch on my couch this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it not the most memorable tournament, but again, I wasn't there. I did miss it a lot, seeing the coverage and seeing obviously people that we knew, Cole Purvis and some of the other people who covering the tournament, which was great. But I agree. I was expecting more. I really felt like when I was back for break, I watched a lot of games, including TA games, and I just felt like it was the playing field was a lot more level. I feel like the last couple of years it's been 3 or 4 top teams, and you got your bottom. And so the first couple of rounds, not really until the state championship do you get good games. And I felt like it was going to be a lot better and not really at that point. But you did mention something that I wanted to bring up, which was that the media coverage. I really feel like it took a step up. I feel like they covered games very well. They covered more games. It really felt like there was a lot more media attention on the tournament. And in the state of Maine, we don't have Cooper Flack's no longer in Maine. So we didn't have like one player that was getting all the attention, which I honestly think is great. It was kind of spread out. But I was seeing a lot of stuff on like Class A, Class B, Class C teams, things that we haven't seen in a while. Whereas in the past it's been all Class AA. But it's been really good to see. Like I've almost felt like I was there. All the coverage that I was seeing here, in Connecticut, just in the tournament. So, obviously you said you've watched games, you've seen that stuff. So like, just give me a little bit of what you've seen from the coverage, not only from, like news stations, but also just like, like basic, like writing and broadcasting and just like people live tweeting games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're always going to have, guys like Travis Lee and Dave Eade, who I think hopefully we'll have both of them on here in the podcast in the future. They do great coverage of everything for channels 8 and 13. Michael Hoffer for the Forecaster, who we're going to have on later today, plus all the other sports writers up and down Maine. But yeah, I think the big difference is now you don't even have to watch the game sometimes. You can really get a feel for it. You look at like Maine basketball rankings, guys like that, guys like Cole, who are going to a lot of games, people who are live tweeting the games, giving some opinions and using video as well, which I think, as we talk about X, that's really kind of been a game changer. You have Big Time Hoops Maine. You have like Levinsky, you have Thomas Curtis, all these guys who are either students, younger guys, even some middle-aged guys like me, going above and beyond and not just, watching the games, but also giving their opinion. And for me, that's what's made this tournament, definitely taken a level up, because it maybe has not been the most exciting tournament in terms of the actual gameplay, but you're seeing kind of a revolution in these using these platforms. I think using X and Instagram are the two ones that you're going to see the most for these kind of I don't want to say amateur, but people who aren't working maybe for publications but working for themselves. You see Refin, he talks a lot about the officials, so you really get it from all angles. Let's just say
big thing this tournament.
It is, yeah. So I think, I think the word revolution is great. I hope it continues. There's something special about basketball that brings everyone together. And the fact that these tournament games all happen at the 3 or 4 places around the state allows us to kind of have this hub where you're not just going to a football game, which is great, but you're kind of traveling around the state trying to do that. So hats off to everybody who grinded. And, we'll mention Cole again. He's a senior here at Thorne Academy, did a ton of games for WHOU, who I think does an amazing job. Yes, it's $10 a month, but you get so much quality out of that. So hats off to all of them who did the live streaming itself. And then this weekend coming up, we'll have Maine Public, PBS basically. And I want to mention that too, because that's one big one. When I was a kid, PBS basically had all the rights to all the games on TV. And so you'd be able to, especially during vacation week, I would sit there. You could sit there from 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning until 10 at night watching, coverage from mostly Augusta and Bangor, sometimes down the Portland area. This is before they used the Expo. I loved that. Now, the live streaming's great. But PBS is free. They had games all the time. Now, PBS had to pull back their coverage a lot because it's ridiculously expensive to do these games. So now they just do the state games, which is great. But that's one thing I miss. The fact that you have to, if you want to watch all the games, you have to have PBS, you have to have a subscription to WHOU and a subscription to NFHS. Which different qualities, different plans. So that's the only negative I had. But otherwise, there's even if we have complaints about not having the most exciting games, there's no complaints about the media coverage, whether it's print, whether it's online, or whether it's just straight on the news.
Yeah, I agree, and I gotta go back to your point. Is like you said that the $10 is for WHOU is worth it for the whole tournament. I will say though, as a college student, there's a couple of games I really wanted to watch. And then I was like, oh, pay. And I was like, I don't know about that. I might have to save the dollars. But, we're obviously going to talk more about this tournament probably throughout the entire episode. We've got it in our segments. We're going to talk to Michael Hoffer about it. But just really quick, we talked about Thornton Academy upsetting South Portland in that first round. The boys team did. The girls team didn't get very far. You and you've been at TA a lot longer than I have, but even when I was there, it really felt like we were always one of the top teams. And this year was just disappointing in general. I mean, even from what I saw over break, I want to get your thoughts on how they played and almost like, how did it feel after, we're heading into this tournament week where usually we're thinking, oh, TA is going to have 2-3 games at the Cross Insurance Arena or at the Expo or whatever. And it's just like this year is like there's one and they didn't even play very good.
Yeah, I mean, look, first, each team had a new coach this year, which is always a hard transition. Two very different teams. The boys, they lose Will Davies, who was a fantastic player, Mr. Basketball. So, you watch them. I don't think their record indicated how they were. I think they were much better than their record was. You saw that against South Portland when they put it all together. The problem is when you don't have that superstar player who can step up. And look, Wyatt Benoit is a great player and will come back next year. And I think TA boys will be excellent next year.
Yeah.
You just need that second and third player to step up. And they didn't have a consistent guy to do that. They would have one great game from one guy and then one great game for the other. Too many turnovers, too many, mistakes that you see a lot of other teams make that we're just not used to them seeing. For the boys, they'll be back next year. For the girls, a lot of it came down to injuries. They had a new coach as well. They had a big three coming into the year. But Kylie Lamson, she hurt herself, lower body injury, so she was out for most of the rest of the season, the second half of the season. Did play in the playoff game against Sanford, but you can't expect her to be 100% after missing so much time. And then Addison Sulikowski was out with an illness as well for the end of the year and the playoff game. So tough. They had Emma Zot come in here, who's a fantastic player. Her teammates are at Cheverus are undefeated, looking to win another state championship like they did 2 years ago. But yeah, look, they'll be back. There's no question. We're understanding, we don't have a ton of success in basketball in terms of winning state championships, but I think they'll both be competitive next year, especially the boys, because they have a lot coming back.
Yeah, I also thought Coach Mike Nelson had a great year too. I was reading a lot and trying to focus in on how they lost a ton of games in a row and they go out to South Portland, they win that playoff game. Like the mentality change is just like I really thought. Great would end your season. I mean, obviously they go to the Cross Insurance Arena, they lose to Scarborough on some great Scarborough shooting, but you're right. I agree. I think they got a great team, and next year they got a lot of guys who are not graduating, which is great. So they'll be great. But it's a big change. I came back over break and I was like, I honestly was not expecting to see them lose games, and I went to a couple, and it just didn't feel like the old TA where you go to games and they'd be winning by 20 or 30, and just they'd be top seed every year.
Can't be the top seed every year. Gotta have a rebuilding year sometimes.
yeah, for sure. Well, right now we're going to head into our first segment of the show. We're calling this The Rundown. Each week, Jeff and I are going to give our 3 biggest topics or stories that we want to talk about. We'll go one off each and just talk about whatever. Mostly it's going to be about Maine sports. But Jeff, why don't you start us off with your first topic, and we'll get into this one.
Yeah, my first, of course, has to be the state championships coming up here in boys and girls basketball. We're going to just talk about Double A because that really kind of affects the Southern Maine segment here, maybe a little bit more. So in the girls, you have Gorham against Cheverus. Cheverus coming in at 20-0, Gorham at 18-3. Cheverus won the title, their first ever back in 2022. They obviously are led by Maddie Fitzpatrick. She has a lot of good plaudits for good reason, but really it's their defense. If you look at their stats, their defense is unbelievable, and they beat Thornton Academy twice. I saw them here in person. They've only allowed opponents to score more than 50 points twice in their 20 games. Their last 5 games, including playoff games, allowed 29, 34, 23, 35, and 38. So not allowing anyone to score above 38 points, including 2 playoff games, is impressive. For Gorham, I mean, Service is certainly the favorite. Gorham can definitely be there. They have the pedigree in the last 10 years with Mackenzie Holmes, Emily Esposito as well. They've won a lot of championships, and Lon Berthium, their coach, is just fantastic. They also have a stout defense. So if you look at their last 6 games, 35, 38, 20, 31, 14, 34, and 37 points allowed. So again, it's going to be maybe first one to 40 will win this game. It's a third straight regional title for the Rams. They're 6 and 8 seasons, and they'll face Cheverus on Saturday. Gorham hasn't won a state championship since 2017, and Cheverus, of course, won in 2022. So that'll be a great game. And then looking at the boys, again, Gorham back in it again. They're going against Wyndham. It's a Gorham doubleheader. So, Zach, here's the question for you. Let's see if you can figure it out. When's the last time a boys and girls team from the same school won the gold ball in any division, let alone the top division?
The problem is here is I don't want to be too wrong. I feel like I'm gonna get the. Let me go 1993.
Not even close. It was 2018.
Wow. Oh my gosh!
Edward Little. Edward Little won both boys and girls back just 6 years ago. Yeah. So, but there's a chance that it could happen twice this year. So again, you have Gorham in there. They were dominant. Gorham was in the old Class B before they kind of restructured. This is their first state championship appearance in Class AA. They did meet in the regular season. Gorham beating Wyndham by 27 back on January 15th. So not that long ago, about a month ago.
Yeah.
So for me, looking at Wyndham, they have more experience in close games. They played a lot of close games. It's their first ever trip to the state championship, so it's going to be very special. The crowd's going to be frothing at the mouth there in Portland. They are a lower scoring team, so they're going to want to keep that game low. They want to keep it in the 40s or 50s. So just kind of looking at these two games, look, certainly I would say Cheverus is the favorite in the girls and Gorham in the boys. I've seen Cheverus twice. Billy Goodman's their coach. He's fantastic. They're so disciplined. They have Maddie Fitzpatrick, fantastic player. We saw her score her 1,000th point here at Thornton Academy this year. So they're certainly the favorites, but Gorham's going to have a plan for them. It's just a matter of who executes. Both of them had a fairly easy run through their region, so they didn't really have many scares, at least in the second half. And then on the boys' side, look, Wyndham's it's a great story. It's just Gorham seems, they're probably the heavy favorites on it just because Wyndham's never been there. They are playing close games, but they're also playing teams that are a little bit beneath them, a little bit closer. So if I had to take my pick, I would say, Cheverus and Gorham pretty comfortably this weekend. What are your thoughts on those two games?
Yeah, I mean, Cheverus, obviously, that was my point. Again, I'm working on previous knowledge here. I saw a couple of games from a couple of these teams this year when I was back home in December, but Billy Goodman, like that, he's a difference maker in a tournament game, especially a state championship game. And I don't think that the Gorham girls team really has that extra little bit, and that extra little bit is Maddie Fitzpatrick. Like that, she's just an incredible player, and so I'm not too worried about Cheverus winning that. I think they got the state championship pretty much in the back at this point. But for the boys' side, I actually have no clue. I've seen both teams play this year, and the one thing I like about it is that it's not a one player, leads his team. Like Gorham's got, Kane Smith, Gabe Mishu, Ashlyn Leclerc. Wyndham has Tyree James. They got some other great players too. Can't even remember their names off the top of my head. Honestly, the only reason I know some of these Gorham players is because I worked with them in the summer, and I got to learn a little about the team, but. They got a really deep roster, and I think both of them feel like they're going into a state game a little bit not unprepared, but like into a new environment. So we'll see what happens. But this is the one thing I could say for sure is I do not think that 27-point performance in the regular season is going to be any indication of what the state game is going to be like.
Teams have played 10 games probably since then. They're not too much difference. The only other one I want to mention, we're going to watch more of the games and more in depth with Michael Hoffer later. Oceanside. So the boys and the girls are both in the state championship in Class B. The girls take on Old Town. The boys take on Orono. Both teams are combined 40-0 this year. So my two questions for you are, how do you think, we saw this year in Class A football, or I should say Maine high school football, Leavitt, winning the state championship in C. They beat Thornton Academy, who won the Class A state championship. And a lot of people said Leavitt was the best team in the state of Maine. Totally fair argument this year. What do you think? How do you think Oceanside, I saw a couple of their games on live stream. I haven't seen them in person. How do you think both of those teams would do in Class AA maybe this year specifically?
Yeah. So I had the privilege of seeing the Galley brothers last year, and it was incredible. And also Bailey Breen, who's on the Oceanside girls team. I think the Galley brothers are a special situation here of like two players that if they were in, the Saco, Gorham, Portland, wherever in Class AA, they'd be lighting it up. And unfortunately, they're at a school that just, population-wise, the school's numbers are staying in a Class C or Class. Is it Class C? It is.
They're in Class B.
Oh, Class B. Yeah.
For basketball. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Galley Bros would do just fine in Class AA, and I honestly think it's unfortunate that they are in Class B. But I think Bailey Breen's a great player, but I just don't know. I think individually she'd be great on any of these teams, but back to like your original question was how would these Oceanside teams do? Think they'd I think they'd be middle of the pack, bottom of the pack, maybe. You're looking at individual talents. The Galley Birds are throwing up like 30 points a game, and these two brothers have played together for so long. They know where each other are on the floor at all times, and that's just something crazy. That's why they're so good. And Breen also, great paint player, knows how to shoot the ball, and has learned, playing with players that may not be at her same level, how to take over a game. So individually, I think they'd be great in Class AA or even Class A, but I don't know how those teams would do. And I think you mentioned Levitt. It's one of those things like, if they were in Class AA, they might, but they're not. So we really don't know. Like, obviously, I'd love to see Oceanside play like a Wyndham or a Gorham and just get a good feel of how they'd be for boys or girls. But we'll honestly never know. We could always compare them, but yeah. I mean, it's one of those like what if situations that you're gonna have to just like figure out on your own.
Yeah, it's good. It's good fodder. And congratulations. Yeah. We'll see what they do. There was a little controversy early in the year with the Oceanside boys and scoring a lot of points. It's kind of water under the bridge now. If they win, great. They haven't been scoring that many points in in the playoffs here, so I don't think they're going to care. One of those things. I mean, look, Thornton Academy football has been, they in the past few years we scored a lot of points on some teams and people get mad, but when you win states, no one really cares. So I say, do what you got to do, win the state championship, and again, if those two teams can both win states and be a combined 42-0, I would put that up against any other performance for a school, any basketball season ever. I mean, I'd love to hear from other people about what two teams were that dominant for both boys and girls in the same year.
Yeah, that's the best point right there. Like obviously this controversy with scoring too many points and making it unfair. But let's really be honest. Like that game didn't have an impact on standings. It didn't really have an impact on how the Oceanside team is doing or the team that they played. It was like the top of Class B versus bottom of Class B. Like in general, I don't think that they should ever be penalized for something like that. But on top of it, it has probably zero impact on the overall season and where they are right now. So I just don't, like you said, it's water under the bridge. It's not something that I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, this team is, put up, school won by 80 and like no one's going to say that. They're going to say, wow, look at the Galley brothers who just won and won a Class B state championship. Like that's going to be the story.
Yeah, well, hope some good games this weekend. We'll catch by the time people listen to this, maybe they've seen the games. But I'll talk to Michael Hoffer a little bit later about what he thinks about these games. And I think maybe next week we may have Cole Purvis on to give us a little recap because he's going to see more games of basketball this year than most people have. So he's been a lot of games. So
yeah, his X feed was very active. A lot of reporting, a lot of calling games, doing a lot of production as well. So shout out to him just for a lot of great coverage. But
absolutely.
Again, it's great to see how much coverage there was this year, and especially being away from it, it was nice to see.
Yeah.
So I'll go into my first topic, and I'm gonna switch up my order a little bit here. So, situation I'm in right now, I go to school in Connecticut, at Quinnipiac, and I would say 75 to 80% of the population here is from Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. Not a lot of like upper New England, not a lot of New Hampshire or Maine. And, I was actually very surprised. Now, a lot of the people, when they hear basketball in Maine, they hear Cooper Flag. And a lot of people will say Cooper Flag. But there are a lot of people that knew about JP Estrella, who obviously is at the Division I level, but somebody that was a little bit more local. And there are a lot of people, and it's surprising, like I said, that know of Maine basketball. So, and I do think that's from Cooper Flag. I mean, that's my point. My kind of topic and what I wanted to ask you about is just like, Cooper Flag, obviously from went to Nokomis, then went to Mount Verde and blew up on the scene, and he's from Maine, but like what he's done for the outlook of Maine sports, like the biggest connection is like Cooper Flag is from Maine. And now everyone's like, oh, there's people who are going to probably who are NBA draft picks, that are from Maine. And so I guess the question is just what do you think Cooper Flag, how he's changed that outlook and culture? Because, I like I said, I was so surprised that people have knowledge of Maine sports where I feel like 5-10 years ago that that's just not the case whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of great players over the years. I mean, I'll go back to my generation. Nick Cantor-Medley was a player. He played for Deering when I was in high school. I think he's maybe 2 years older than I was. First time I ever saw a player where I said, that guy's different. You know, they came here my sophomore year and they put up like 98 points. They had a fantastic team. They had 3 D1 players on their team. He goes off to Maryland, has a great career. He played over in Europe for a long time. I'm sure made a lot of money, so good for him. But the problem is those have kind of been few and far between. We had Ralph Mims, who was a Brunswick player who had a very famous state title game. I forget what year it was. Must have been like 2005, 2006 maybe. So and then there was kind of a big break before we had, JP Estrella and Cooper Flagg. I think where Cooper Flagg became so different was because he was so polished at such a young age. Mm-hmm. And if you looked at him physically, I saw him play once in person in this freshman year. And he wasn't physically filled out. Like Nick Cantor-Medley, when he was a sophomore, looked like a man. Like he looked like a 25-year-old like pro athlete. Whereas Cooper Flagg didn't, but he had such a great game. And I think when I said, okay, this is serious, is when he was playing one of the playoff games in Portland, and Brian Scalabrine came, and he was in the crowd watching the kid and had some comments about him. So that was when I was like, all right, this is not just the Maine media rightfully hyping up a kid who could go D1. This is, I mean, you saw Kevin Durant last week say that he thinks Cooper Flagg could be a star in the NBA for 10 to 15 years. I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on the kid. He hasn't even gone to college yet. And he obviously he's younger because he's reclassified to go to Duke next year to get in the NBA a year earlier, perhaps. No, I think it's great. I think for me, I'm always curious when we had this huge bump of that year where we had Flagg and Estrella, 2 guys who went D1 or going D1. How's that going to sustain? Like, all of these, look at Big Time Hoops Maine, all these other people that we mentioned before that are doing a great job of reporting on Maine high school sports. Is that going to continue are people going to be interested when it's a year like this where there's really not any superstar player from any class? So I think the answer is yes. I think there's, looking at media and when TV stations or newspapers decide to cut, understandably, I never understand when they cut people who are doing high school sports, because high school sports are something that everybody wants to know about. 100%. You want to see your kid in the newspaper. You want to see highlights. There's always going to be a place where you can get better Red Sox coverage, or different Red Sox coverage. And name the sport, right? There's ESPN, there's Nesson, there's whatever. There's all these media outlets. But for high school sports, there's usually only one media outlet you have a chance to look at. And it's local, and it gives you pride. So it's great to see Maine finally put on the map for something. Now, do I expect that this will start a run of D1 players and NBA players? No. I think Cooper Flagg, and we'll see about Estrella. He's got a long way to go if he wants to go to the NBA, but Cooper Flagg is a once-in-a-lifetime, pro athlete. I think if he continues on his path, we're going to see something very special. So, yeah, it's too bad he's only here for a year. I totally understand why. But as far as the media coverage goes, I hope that all these guys who are grinding right now are able to grind, not only because they want to, but that people have enough interest to keep looking. And we're one of the ones that are doing that kind of thing right now. So people are still yearning for content and Maine high school content as the newspapers and TV stations contract. Channel 6 doesn't even really do sports anymore, which is crazy. We'll talk about in a future episode. But as those contract, you need other people to kind of push that forward. And there's always going to be a thirst for high school sports.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like I'll my next kind of point into this is that, there's this almost like, I'm not going to say tag. I don't think tag's the right word, but, how long will, let's just say hypothetically, which I don't think this is that much of a hot take, but Cooper Flagg goes to Duke, UConn. Or is he? Is it
Cooper Flagg's going to Duke. He's a Dookie, baby.
Oh, sorry.
Heck yeah. UConn was his finalist too.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. I don't know why I got mixed up there. Maybe it's because I watched the UConn game the other day. Anyways, he goes to Duke. He goes for 2 years. I don't think he's going to go 1 year and leave, but let's say he goes 2 years. He goes to the NBA, top 5 draft pick. When does he lose this tag of like Cooper Flagg from Maine? Like, when does it just become Cooper Flagg and nobody really cares about Maine? Because, like, I'll give examples. There are other players, professional players, especially in the NBA, that are from Maine. Duncan Robinson, a great shooter for the Miami Heat, is from York, Maine. He played high school in Maine for a couple of years, and then he left and went to a prep school. But when do you think he loses that tag? Because when he loses that tag, it doesn't help Maine sports, doesn't help us, gain that. And do you think that that is impacted by how he what he speaks about Maine? Because that's also a factor in it too.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for Maine sports fans, it'll never change. Like, he'll always
Oh, of
be that kid
course.
from Maine, right? So, but the difference between someone like Duncan Robinson is, like, I didn't even know that. Like, Duncan Robinson's not a guy that was ranked number one, didn't play for Team USA, wasn't ranked number one in his recruiting class, didn't go to Duke, isn't probably going to be a top 5 pick. So I don't think he's ever. I don't know if that someone like Kevin Durant's going to be like, wow, this kid's from Maine. Maine kids can play. Like, I don't know. I just don't. I'm not ready to say that for some reason, like, Maine high school athletes have been giving a raw deal over the years. Mm-hmm. I just think he's just a freak in a great way, And JP Estrella, I mean, he's a freak. You don't see many 6'9", 6'10" guys or however tall he is, being able to play like that. So for me, I don't look at it as he's ever going to lose the luster of being a top Maine athlete. I think the fact that, he'll be a local hero forever if he continues to do what he's doing, a statewide hero. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I go so far as to say that, he's going to lose just because he went to Montverde for a couple of years. The fact that he played 1 year of high school basketball here was pretty fantastic. And he grew up in a very small town. It wasn't like he was in York, which is basically New Hampshire North, or Portland even, which is like a big city. He grew up in, a tiny little town on the coast. So I think that, for me, it's such a cool story. And I think, if he becomes an NBA star, you'll see some stories where they come back to Maine here and do some B-roll of what it was like to play in some of these small gyms when he played that 1 year in high school.
Yeah. And that's the hope, is that, at least from his side of it, is that he'll keep that Maine connection. Like, whether or not he does that for Maine sports or just for himself, I hope he does that, because that's great. Like, to keep that hometown connection and always stay rooted, like, where he was from. And like,
he seemed like a great kid. Like, I've never met him, but everybody that's ever encountered him saying he's down to earth. And his brother's pretty darn good too. It's almost feel bad, because if Ace hadn't have a twin brother who's going pro basically after 1 year, he'd be the talk of the town. Maybe not as highly rated, but certainly would have been the best player in Maine for a while.
Yeah, and that's its own conversation as well, of like the brothers going to Mount Verde, and where's Ace in this conversation, and what might that look like if they both make the professional level. And I'm excited to see where this is going to go for him and for the state of Maine and for the NBA. But it was pretty crazy when, like, I say, I'm from Maine to some people, and all I hear is Cooper Flagg and JP Estrella. I'm like, nice. Like, at least you know about those guys, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. So a segue, I'm going to do my second on the rundown. Okay, each of us will do 3 of them. And this is, again, a little bit about the basketball tournament. Not so much about on the court, but off the court. So I want to talk about the venues for Maine high school basketball. It's changed a lot over the years in terms of, how many teams make the playoffs, where the first rounds are. Again, when I was in high school, I graduated in 2003, a long time ago. Very different. You basically, there's no expo because that was before the Red Claws. Now the Celtics were there, so that was not a facility you wanted to play in. So most is basically a lot of home games until you went to the Cumberland County Civic Center at the time. So right now, basically here in Southern Maine, you have the first round that's at the home venues, and then you have in Class AA, they go right to the Civic Center. Now in the other classes, they go to the Expo for a round or two, and then the Civic Center eventually for states. Then you have the Augusta Civic Center, and then you have the one up in Bangor. So for me, ranking them, I really miss the fact that in AA as Thornton Academy, we never played at the Expo in the playoffs. We used to. I don't know the exact years. I want to say back in the early 2010s, we used to have a round of the Expo. I remember us playing Westbrook there once. The Expo is special. Now I understand why. It's not as big as a Cross Insurance Arena, obviously. So for state game, you would definitely sell out. But I saw some video of Gray New Gloucester playing Noble, or I forget who they're playing, but those two crowds, unbelievable atmosphere in the Expo. You fill that Expo, it's incredible. So I wish that they would have more games at the Expo, even for AA opponents. Yep. CIA is just, it's big as cavernous. I was there courtside at the TA game versus Scarborough. It was dead. Like, and that's not to say anything bad about the crowds, but like, it wasn't full. It was probably about half full, which isn't bad for, it was a vacation day, but it was late at night. Just didn't have the atmosphere. And then I want to add on to the controversy, so to buy tickets to the Cross Insurance Arena online, you got to go through Ticketmaster because that's the contract that CIA has with them. And there was some screenshots people were sending about the crazy fees. We all know about the crazy fees for Ticketmaster for everything, but someone had a screenshot. Is a $5 student ticket. And on top of that, there was a $5.25 service fee and a $5 order processing fee. So for a $5 student ticket, you're paying more than $15, okay, which is absurd. And so what was the MPA's response to that? Well, we think you should try to buy it in person. So for me, that's kind of a red flag. When people are having to, you want to be able to buy online because that's way more convenient nowadays. But when you're going through these, when you're choosing venues that are charging these exorbitant fees, it's absurd. So I'm hoping that again that they, I would love the smaller ones. People say the state game should be at the Expo. Again, I can see why you don't want them there because most of those are going to be close to sell. It's even at the Cross Insurance Arena. The Augusta Civic Center is amazing. They should keep that forever. It's kind of in disrepair right now in some places, but they need to fix that. And the one at Bangor as well. I've never been up there. I just want to put a quick mention in as my last point is speaking of atmosphere for hockey. Now, most of the games are the Cross Insurance Arena as well. Once it gets to kind of the later stages, a little bit better atmosphere there. But in the old days, back in the early 2010s when Thornton Academy was very good at hockey, they would play some of the rounds of the Lewiston Bank Coliseum. That was fantastic. Like when that place is empty, not great. Those state games we played in 2011 and 2012, I mean, that was a crazy atmosphere, totally packed all the way around the barn. I don't know if they definitely don't play down south there anymore. I don't know what the deal is there because it's changed hands a lot in terms of what other junior teams are playing there. So that for me, I was like Expo would be my number one place to watch a game. Second would be the Lewiston Bank Coliseum for hockey. Augusta Civic Center would be third because we played there in states for girls in 2015-ish. We've lost in states there, but it's crazy atmosphere. You can see why everybody loves it there. So that's my take now on these as we finish up with the tournament here. More games at the Expo for AA people.
Yeah. I agree. I have similar takes. I think, my issues with the Civic, the Cross Insurance Arena stem farther than just high school, but into the Mariners. I worked for the Mariners, and unfortunately, you can't sell out a stadium that has 7,500 seats. Like
it's a lot. It's only 6,000, but it's a lot.
Yeah. But in the ECHL, no team in the entire ECHL is selling out arenas, and it goes. Right. It ranges from 3,000 to 8 or 9,000. So, and sometimes it makes the atmosphere look bleak, not as great. And on top of that, I'll add that the Mariners, out of all of the ECHL teams, had one of the best fan attendances throughout the year. Like the numbers were crazy high, which is great. But I definitely agree. The Expo is better. It's tighter. It's more compact. I think that's just, in my opinion, that's fact. Like when things are smaller and everybody's closer together and the energy gets high, it makes it just better in general. But it's to play in a big place like that. I do think I like the way the court is set up. I like the way they have that at the Cross Insurance Arena. But yeah, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, unfortunately.
No,
it's going to stay that way. And with the Coliseum, with hockey, I've been there. The one time I went to a playoff game was a state championship maybe 4 or 5 years ago between Biddeford and St. Dom's. And that was crazy. The energy was crazy.
It's an old arena. It's not nice, but it just works. I love it.
It does, yeah. And so last year, the TA, oh my God, they played South Portland,
Scarborough in the championship. I was gone. I was in Florida. I didn't get to go to it. I think they played Scarborough in the States.
Yeah, but that the game was solid. But again, it's not. They're not filling it out, and it just doesn't look as good as it could be. I still think in general the attendance is very good at the Expo, at the Cross Insurance Arena. It's good to see people showing up. I saw somebody tweet about it, I don't even know, but for the GNG Noble game, they were like people showing up like 2 hours before game time, in that slot, like when the doors open, like 2 hours before. The people were showing up just to show up for the game. So it's good to see, but in a perfect world, it would, they'd be packed in the Expo, or they'd be back in the Coliseum, or there'd be an arena that just had the perfect size and the perfect energy.
Yeah, parking stinks at all the places anyway, so that's something that's common.
Yeah,
maybe not Augusta. Augusta is great parking, but Portland, they're awful.
Obviously, yeah. So my next topic for the rundown, let's stem a little bit away from Maine sports. It's still a little bit, but Justin Brazo, who you may or may not have heard of, Jeff. I'm not sure if this is very, very
I did some research after today.
Yeah. So Brazo just had his debut for the Boston Bruins. I think he's played 4 games now. Had a goal in his debut. Had really, really, really awesome first game. But the most impressive thing about the story is that started with the Mariners, the Maine Mariners in Portland in the ECHL, and then moved his way up to Providence, and then moved his way up for a debut with the Bruins. And I think I saw a stat the other day. Out of in the entirety of the ECHL in its history, only 200 players have been able to go from ECHL to AHL to NHL, which in itself is very, very impressive. So, with the Bruins, there's two cases here. You've got Justin Brazeau, and then you've got Brandon Bussi, who's now in Providence, but is an NHL caliber goalie, in my opinion. But, I guess my question is not only in the NHL but in other leagues. Do you think that there is hidden talents? Like, do you think this is a hidden talent situation with Brazeau? Great player in the ECHL, didn't play many games there. Was actually had a contract with Providence and then was sent down for about 20 games or so. But with Providence, it's a very, very solid player. Just kind of stays under the radar, and then all of a sudden he gets a chance. And it's like, oh my God, this guy, he's a bottom six winger. He's got talent. He's got skill. He knows how to play, and this is his debut, and he scored a goal. So do you think that whether it's in the NHL or in other leagues, do you think that there's hidden talents, or this is just more of like one guy getting overlooked for a long time and then finally getting his debut?
That's hard because I feel like a lot of it comes down to getting a shot, because I think when you look at some of these minor leagues, whether it's the NBA, MBD, or G League, minor league baseball, not really a minor league in football, but the gap between the great and the great, I mean, the greats, the ones who make the pros, are so small, and we see it here. When you watch college hoops, or I remember the first time I ever saw like a real college basketball team walking around. It was many years ago. I was in a hotel and there was a tournament, and Kansas with Joel Embiid and Andrew Wiggins was on that team too, and they were walking around the hotel, and I remember walking behind them, and they're freaks, and it's like even their 11th guy on the bench, I was like, this guy is 6'9", like super lanky. Now he's never going to go pro, but that is a basketball player, right? So for these guys, a lot of it's about getting a shot. I don't know if there's hidden talents. I think the place you see most hidden talents actually is football. Like when you're seeing recent years, running backs and wide receivers, especially, that are coming from these Division 1 AA or football conference subdivision or Division 2, that they're getting drafted later round and they're playing pretty well. I think football is almost a little bit more equalized, because you can, even if you're a little bit undersized, if you're fast, you can probably find a spot at certain positions. Not every position, of course. As far as hidden talents go, these teams have so many talent evaluators. My only question would be about analytics. So if they're using analytics as a driving force, I do think there are people who are getting left behind because there's that intangible. You look at a guy like Julian Edelman. I'll use him as an example. Probably wasn't a big analytics guy, but came in an era where he got a shot, and look, he came, in my opinion, very close to a Hall of Fame career. So yeah, I would think it really drives on analytics. I don't know much about Brazeau, but I think if they get a shot and they can perform, then great. But I think the problem is a lot of these guys aren't getting shots because unless your scouting department, is getting a lot of attention, if you're just looking at numbers on a spreadsheet, we can get another guy that can be a WAR of 1.2 or whatever that is. So good for him that he got the chance though.
Yeah, of course, and I think indirectly, Brazeau actually falls in that category that you mentioned. He with Providence this year, 49 games, 37 points, didn't lead the team in any category. His plus minus was not out of this world. He's a good, solid player, but it wasn't I think in most situations, guys like that get overlooked, and that's why I think it was a surprise. It's like, why are we giving Justin Brazeau a look? Whereas for people who know the Providence Bruins, you got Fabian Lysell, you got Toporowski, you got these guys who are at the top with points, and have helped Providence and are scoring 2-3 points a game. Why are they giving Brazeau a chance? But that might just be Boston. That might just be Jim Montgomery. That just might be their management. But it's interesting. It's interesting to think about, and it makes me look ahead to a guy like, as I mentioned, Brandon Bussi, who started in Maine. He played 4 games in Maine, and immediately they were like, he's not supposed to be here. Let's send him to Providence. And then in his rookie year, won. I think he won the Rookie of the Year in the AHL, or at least in one of the conferences, as a goaltender, which is hard to do in itself. So he was an all-star. So he is a guy who could be in the NHL, but it's like, is he ready for that? Is he just was this just a crazy moment of him making that step up, or what does it look like? And then if I wanted to right now, I could go into should we have Brendan Boosty go to the NHL and let's trade Linus Ullmark? But that's just such a whole different conversation. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting, and it's also great to see for a guy like this, and it makes the Mariners organization look better. It makes Providence look better, and it makes Boston look better to say, like, who for years Boston has had been looked at as one of the horrible farm system. They don't have young guys. They don't have talent coming up, and it's like, oh, this guy came from Maine, 2 levels down that no one knows about, and look at what he's doing now in his debut. So it was a good story.
Awesome. My last story for the rundown this week is court storming, and there's a controversy coming last weekend. Duke Wake Forest wins at the end. Duke ranked like number 7 or 8, something like that. Wake Forest unranked, even though they had like 17 or 18 wins. They stormed the court. Kyle Filipowski, one of the best basketball players in the country, gets hit. Thankfully, not seriously injured. And once in a while, these stories come up about court storming. I want to give my quick take. So, look, I'm a Duke fan, so I got a little bias. Look, I understand that court storming is a uniquely college thing. I stormed a court once. I wasn't in college, but I was shortly out of college. I went back for the America East Championship game. BU was in it. We won, like not at the buzzer, but right close. We all stormed the court. It's anarchy, right? I understand how cool it must feel. Here's where we went wrong, where Wake Forest and their security are at fault for this. I'm not saying they should ban court storming, but they need to have a plan to get everyone off the floor and then storm the court. Because if you look at that one specifically, those fans are running as fast as they can. These college kids are sprinting on the court, no regard for human life. A lot of times you see them on football fields now where they're interacting with these players of the other team, taunting them, putting their phone in their face. So I think you need to have some kind of plan. Look, the game's about to be over. Pull the players for both teams off the floor if they want to come off the floor, and then have some fun. I also think that another piece of this that is kind of lost is the debate about when is court storming appropriate. Wake Forest beating Duke, I get it. Duke is Duke. Duke was a top 10 team. It's not Wake Forest was a horrible team. They're have a chance to make the tournament if they make a deep run in the ACC tournament. But there's always that thing of like, you've seen some examples of teams that should not be storming the court or storming the field when they win a game. You should have a little bit more pride than that. On the other hand, I understand they're college kids, but I think this hopefully will get some changes in terms of let's make sure the players are safe first before the college kids get to have their fun. There's a happy medium between like ban it, it's terrible, and whoa, don't do anything. They're just college kids. Well, if you want to be walking off a floor with 50 people coming directly from your side, I wouldn't want to be doing that too. So I think hopefully this will be some good will come from it. And Wake Forest and other schools will take precautions. And some schools do take those guys off the floor because this wasn't a buzzer beater. That is almost acceptable if it's a buzzer beater. This was not. They were up by 4 points with a few seconds to go. Everyone knew they were going to win the game, pull them off the floor. So I think that's a happy medium for court storming controversy right now.
Yeah, and that's the key point right there is just, we're looking at the difference between what you can plan for and what you can't plan for. And that's why I differ with your opinion just a little bit is like, I do think that if there's 8 seconds left and we're at that point in the game where we're shooting foul shots and it's over, but it's over, there has to be some quick kind of like, it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. We need to get as much security down here as fast as possible. I need to go for the star players. And in this case, that was the big controversy was, is it, now here's the side note. It's Filipowski, right?
Yeah, Filipowski. Yeah, I can't pronounce it very well.
I pronounced it wrong the other day, and a Duke fan that I know got really mad at me, and I was like,
just call him Flip.
Like, yeah, that's what I was saying. So everyone just called him Flip. But, to some other degree, you can't control it. I just don't think.
I understand that.
It's really hard to control it.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, this happened a couple weeks prior to Caitlin Clark when Iowa got upset.
Yeah, same thing happened.
She got hit as well, and I don't think she got severely injured. But, in the press conference, she made a comment about like, I got hit hard. Like it's not. You can't have that happen.
Yeah, and what you don't want is you don't want an athlete presuming you're going to get hit. And with hers, it was like there was a little controversy because it looked like she kind of almost initiated the contact. And if someone's saying about Flip too, but it's like I can understand you just played this huge game, you just lost, and you have someone running at you with their phone. Like it's hard for anybody to know. I'm not saying you should punch them out, but like if someone's running right by you in your face, and I'd push them away. I have no problem with athletes doing that. If you're invading the floor, you almost get what you deserve.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing that I actually liked is that Flip was pretty adamant in I don't know if it was just post game or maybe a couple days later, but he was asked about it from media, and he just said honestly, like, it's not okay, it's not
Right.
acceptable, and that was not like he was mad, and
Yeah.
I think he has the right to say like that's not okay. Like I don't know if this is true, but I've seen people saying that like he was getting hit, like people were purposely hitting him and pushing him out of the way. So obviously,
Yeah.
I don't blame him for being upset. But you're right. It's such it's trying to find that happy medium between like, obviously you don't want to ban it. That's just nobody wants that. But you have to have some kind of regulation on it. But in the same sense, it's a bunch of college kids that are just like, I'm going to get to the court, and everybody has that mentality of I'm getting to the court, and they don't want to
Yeah.
stop for anybody there. So
It is
uh,
fun when you do it, though. I did it one time. It was memorable forever.
was it a big gym? Was it like the Wake Forest? Was it like hundreds and hundreds of people, or just like a smaller group?
I would say, well, I mean, we did a little bit. This was at a Agganis Arena in Boston. So it's a decent sized arena. It's like maybe 4,000, 5,000 seats. And I will say, yes, we ran on the court, but it wasn't like the Wake. I mean, if you look at the Wake Forest one, it is like collapsing of people, like sprinting.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's like a few kids and eventually you're able to get through. But that was like a collapsing bag or something. So it wasn't that. It was scary though when you're actually running there, because you don't know how fast this person in front of you is. And thankfully it's unlike football where you're only running 30 feet onto the middle of the floor, and then you just jump up and down, and so it was pretty fun. One time thing though. I can't do that now. I'd die.
My last point about court storming or field storming now specifically is my favorite video of all time. I don't remember what game it was. I don't remember how many years ago, but there's a video of one of the equipment managers for whatever college it was, and when he knew that the field storming was coming, and when it started, he ran to grab the pylons. I don't know if you've seen that video.
I have seen that. Yeah,
running across the sideline to grab the pylons, and he just like he knew it. Like these, like no one's getting these pylons. Like they're going right back to the equipment room. So
absolutely,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
So to finish up this segment of the rundown, I am going to talk about the Boston Bruins. I have to, my favorite team, and right now, absolutely
rough.
Abysmal performances. So I saw this from Adam Pellerin at Nesson. The West Coast road trip they had in January, all the games went to overtime. The West Coast trip in February, all of them went to overtime. But to make matters worse, in February, they were all losses, and most of them were giving up comebacks and having a lead, but then dropping that lead in the third period. So it's very tough to look at the stats and say, look at this. We have 12 regulation losses and 14 overtime losses. That's just giving away free points. And again, this comes back to the argument of like, oh, what can you expect from Boston? They were looked at as a wild card team, maybe third in the Atlantic, and look at what they're doing now. But this type of I get a skid. I understand losing leads and losing in overtime, but this type of skid is like, it just I'll be honest with you. Being in Connecticut, most of it's blacked out. I don't get to watch a lot of games.
It's a good thing.
yeah. But especially with this road trip, like I follow along. I listen to 98.5 and or like some games I missed. I wake up. I went to bed and they were leading, and I wake up and it's like another overtime loss. And I go back and I watch the replay, and it's like they don't care. It's like we got the point. Let's just leave. Like let's just go home. And it's a little embarrassing as a fan. I just don't know. I was almost waiting for something to change. Like either they start losing in regulation and it's like, okay, this is the real middle of the season and towards third quarter of the season skid, or they start winning and it's like, okay, this is just them in overtime and whatever. But it's just continuing to happen, and I honestly don't even know what to think about it because it's just like it's just so it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
So I'll give you the one prompt question. Where are you? Really, the question right now with the Bruins, or one of the questions, is goaltending situation. Do you go with Swayman and Ullmark as in the Stanley Cup playoffs as a rotation, or do you trade Ullmark now, get what you can for him? What are your thoughts on that? Because I've heard everything from Bruins fans. Like one of the others, it just didn't work last year with two guys trying to fill one position in the playoffs.
Well, the problem that I have is I got way too deep into Bruins fan Twitter, so now I see everything. I see both ends of the spectrum. I see the people that are totally reasonable. They're bringing stats. They're listening to what these really good analysts are saying. They're saying, okay, here's my point. I'm going to add on to that. And there's just people saying like, sell the team, screw them all, like it's over, like trade everybody. It's interesting. I think no matter if they trade Ullmark, in the playoffs, you have to go with one goalie. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about how great of friends they are. You go with one. You go with one.
Right.
You can't. The goalie tandem doesn't work.
Never has.
And if last year wasn't enough of a view into how it doesn't work, then I don't know what you've been looking at, because it's just not, it's not a postseason thing. And
Right.
I honestly, I say play the better keeper or goaltender, I should say, is the correct word. But you play the better one. I don't care if it's Swayman. I don't care if it's Omar, and I don't care about your feelings. And I don't think that they're going to care about their feelings if they win a cup or if they make a super deep run. Like, no one's going to, I don't. If let's just say Omar and Swayman are both there, and Omar gets, is the better player and he plays, I don't think Swayman's going to be sitting there going, "Oh, I deserve to play." I think he knows, like, it didn't work last year. I'm not doing that again.
Right.
And then you talk about trading Omar. He's got better value now than he'll have next year. He's not. It's not a bad contract. He still has 1 year after this at $5 million AAV, so it's not terrible. But I like Brandon Bussi to come up and be a backup for Swayman, but then that puts pressure on Swayman to not only play all postseason pretty much, but to finish the season off. And he's playing a lot more games than I think he's used to.
Right.
It just depends on what they can get. The salary cap is really tight at the deadline. And Omar would open that up, but who needs a goaltender right now? And that's the thing, is like, I think a month ago, you could have gotten something really nice, or a couple months ago out of Edmonton when they were struggling to win, or a couple months ago when Toronto was like, we need a goaltender right now. You probably could have gotten better value, but we'll see what happens. This trade deadline, I'm not expecting them to make any moves. I'm also expecting they'll probably make a move or two. I honestly don't really care, because this season to me was such a I have no expectations for them to be this good, and they've being this good even with the overtime losses, like I mentioned. It's just like, let's just see how it goes. I'm excited to watch some postseason hockey. And at that time, I'll be home so I can actually watch the games, because I swear I haven't watched a Bruins game in weeks. Like
didn't you watch every game last year? Like every single. I remember you said, "I'm going to watch every single game last year."
I was close. I didn't keep real count, but if I had to put it in a ballpark, I would say probably like 70 out of 82 games. Wow. I was locked in. But I watch recaps. I look at stats. I listen to the analysts on Twitter. So I think I still have a good understanding of where they're at right now. But I literally can't watch games. It's hard. Everything is. Only thing I can watch is ABC, and most of those games so far this year have been Chicago, Philadelphia, and then or good teams who they're losing to. So
absolutely,
it is. It is
rough time for Bruins fans right now, but you knew that was coming after all the years of continuity. I mean, at some point, stuff was going to happen. Bergeron's gone, and we'll see what happens with Marchand, and it's gonna be an interesting couple of years for you. You still have some great players, but for me, and I'm a very light Bruins fan. For me, I love Charlie McAvoy, but he needs to step up and be a top defender. Like, for the Bruins to win, I mean, he's paid a lot of money for them to be. He needs to be Chara. I'm sorry, but I know Chara's a freak, but if you want the team to win and you're basically cornerstoning your defense around a guy, he needs to be a little bit better. He's a good player, but he's a BU guy, so I love him, but needs to be, take that next step, not just this year I'm talking, but long term, to make sure that him and Pasta and then the goalie, but they have the kind of that backbone to go some deep playoff runs. But at least they're not the Leafs, right?
That's true. We're not the Leafs, and that's what's the best part about it. Yeah. So that's it for the rundown segment. But now we're going to transition into what I've pretty much been most excited for about this episode. Obviously the first episode being our guest, which is Michael Hoffer, sports writer for The Forecaster. I would say you're a lot closer with Hoffer than I am. I've spoken to him a couple of times, but I'm really excited. So let's get into that interview. All right, we want to welcome in our first ever guest on the Maine Rundown Pod. It is Michael Hoffer. Before we get into any talk about the tournament, about your career or anything, just want to introduce you real quick to people who may not know you. As Jeff and I, we've seen you around, past couple of years. But Michael Hoffer is one of the most prestigious sports writers, pretty much in the state of Maine. And he's been the sports editor of The Forecaster newspaper since 2001. He also specializes and spends a lot of time covering the Maine high school basketball tournament every year. So Jeff and I see him around a lot. So for those of you in Maine who might be listening or watching, know who Michael Hoffer is. For those outside the state of Maine may not know, but hopefully today we can get into a lot of that and into some good conversation. So Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, so you're not an original Mainer, but you are a staple of Maine media. So just talk a little bit about your history, where you came from, and one of the reasons is we've talked about, why did you choose Maine to take that leap and come here?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be the first guest. That's pretty. Talk about prestigious. That's really cool. So no, thank you for having me. And I've been very fortunate to have the career I've had, and unlike you guys, where you probably knew what you wanted to do straight out of school at a young age, it really took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do. I was a big sports fan. I go back to Super Bowl 10. That's how old I am.
Can't even do the math on that.
Yeah, so I was only 8, but that's a lot of years ago. But I've been a sports fan my whole life, and just when I was about 30 years old, I finally put together that the sports writing would be a great career, and it was just a question of how do you get into it. But I started out just doing a couple of articles a week for the forecaster, freelancing, and then it kind of grew into a full-time position, and I kind of took it from there. But my perspective is I've always liked to write the way I like to read, and I want to present as much info as possible. Hence the long game stories with the expansive quotes, the historic background, that kind of stuff. Just really the things that I'm interested in. I feel like a lot of people hopefully are as well, and it's always been well received. So even though some of these stories take a long time to write and take me into the wee hours, that's the way to do it. And I've always loved what I do, and like I say, I feel incredibly fortunate to do what I do.
Well, so you mentioned the story form that you do, and you write differently than a lot of people are trained. Like I was trained the pyramid method, most important stuff first and then delve down. Yeah. As long as I've ever read your game stories, 3,000-4,000 words sometimes for the bigger games. Why do you think that is an attractive way? I mean, obviously it's working. Why is that an attractive way? And talk maybe a little bit about how you've been able to do that. Because most newspapers would be like, sorry, you have 350 words to do. Why do you do that? And how do you feel like people react to that?
Well, for starters, I wouldn't be able to do it if it were in print. I mean, certainly you can't have 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus word stories in print. There's just not enough room. So, if I was doing this before we could go on the web and put stuff on our website, I probably would have wound up writing like everyone else. But I've just, like I said, I feel like people want to hear expansive quotes from the kids and the coaches. And, what I do, if you're just an average sports fan in the area, you might pick up an article and glance at it. But if you have kids involved, or if you grew up being a big part of a certain community, this is more in depth than you're going to find anywhere else. And that's where I feel like my niche has come from, is speaking to those people and letting the kids tell their stories and letting the coaches tell their stories. And, so many of these communities have such a rich sports tradition. I mean, the city of Portland by itself, certainly here at Thornton Academy, I mean, you guys have as rich a tradition as anybody. So the past is always there. And so you've got not only what's going on today, but you can reach back and, when's the last time this happened, or has this ever happened before? And, as a sports guy, as a history guy, that's what I love to read about. And that's kind of how it all came about.
Interesting. Zach?
Yeah. So you mentioned, these long stories that you write, it's something more for the web and not really for print. How do you think, can you talk a little bit about how social media has impacted not only your role in your job, but also just like the way that Maine sports and sports coverage has changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been critical and crucial, and I really embraced it. When Twitter first came out, it was an opportunity for me, writing at a small weekly paper that really was limited to just the greater Portland area, to kind of reach out to people all over, and not only to report from games and update scores on a regular basis, which got a good following, but link out game stories that honestly people might not have been able to find otherwise. So that grew. It grew into a huge following on Twitter, which has been awesome. And I just think you have to, regardless of what you do now, you have to embrace all these different avenues of information. And the old time traditional sports writers probably didn't want to have to do anything additional on Twitter and Facebook and that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like a publish or perish type thing in the academic world. You really have to have as much out there as frequently as possible. And it's not just me. I mean, a lot of people do a great job with social media, and it's not just Twitter anymore, obviously, either. It's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's a lot of things that I don't even do. But I think it's all. I'm all for all of it, and the more of it, the better. And I think the more information that we can disseminate, the better.
Yeah, I want to expand on that a little bit. We talked earlier in the podcast about the changing way that the changing media landscape here in Maine. So you look at the traditional styles, obviously Travis Lee, Davey, just legends, they're still doing their thing. Channel 6 has basically stopped doing sports altogether several years ago. The Press Herald obviously still around, but papers like the Journal Tribune, they're not around anymore. So in the Courier, that is our local forecaster, doesn't really have any specific reporters. But what you're seeing is a lot of these startups, Big Time Hoops Maine and the football guys, Maine basketball rankings. Right. We talked about guys like him and all of these other, and for us, it's great as students as well, that are going to these games and covering them. You guys are, meaning you in the professional media, this is what you do for a job. You guys are kind of still backed by companies. What do you say to these people who are just doing it on their own, trying to find a niche? We talked about this year not being, we don't have a Cooper Flag this year. We don't have a JP Estrella. Right. The tournament itself, there haven't been a ton of really exciting games or huge Cinderella runs, but the coverage is more than we've ever seen. When you're sitting there at the games and you're seeing all these other people there, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's great. And, I came along and I came along in a non-traditional manner. So I strongly encourage anyone to try to make a living out of this however you want to do it, because there's non-traditional ways to do it. And, what we've seen with the quote unquote traditional media is, this, we don't have anything anywhere near the coverage we used to, like you alluded to. One of our local TV stations doesn't even really show sports highlights at all anymore. You mentioned the Journal Tribune. The Times Record doesn't have a full-time sports person. We're losing, the traditional media has lost a lot of members, but there's still people out there that want all that coverage. Right. And I think it's great to see new people come along, new ideas. And, I try to be as welcoming and supportive as possible, because once upon a time, it was a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. I was them. And I think you have to give back just as you received, you received the support that I did back in the day. So anything that keeps this going forward is a good thing. And I encourage anyone to find your niche, get your name out there, write as much as possible, even if only a handful of people are reading it. You have to get a start somewhere, and, just do it. I'm on your side. Yeah.
So mentioning the business a little bit, so a few years ago, the Forecaster was purchased or enveloped by Maine Today Media. I'm not going to ask you, put you on the spot saying, do you like it better or not? But what have been the differences that you've noticed? You're basically kind of doing your same thing. You're covering pretty much all high school sports, and really focusing on the seasons of the sports season. So how has that changed for you on the ground, having obviously more exposure, but also have been different kind of pressures that have come along with that?
Yeah, for the most part, my job day to day hasn't changed a lot. But one thing I have noticed is, in the past, say we had a Portland team against a team from the Augusta area playing in a state final. The Waterville Augusta paper would be there, as well as the Press Herald. You'd have different stories. A lot of times now they'll just have one person covering the game for all the papers, so you don't have as many voices, you don't have as many avenues to read. I know as a sports fan, I want the Patriots win the Super Bowl, and it doesn't sound like that's going to happen anytime soon. Nope. But remembering back in the day, I'd go to every website I could find, every newspaper. I want more. Right. And I feel like there's still a lot of an audience for that out there that wants more. So that's one thing that's changed. But I guess the most important thing is we're still viable. We're still employed, and we're going the nonprofit route right now, and knock on wood, so far so good there. So we've had support, different owners over various times, but we've been able to keep this going, and the community still wants the news, and they want the sports, and they want everything that we provide. It might not be necessarily as big a circulation in print anymore, but it doesn't mean that those eyeballs are going away. It's just different ways to access them.
Definitely. Zach?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So as we start to transition here into, this tournament, the basketball tournament, that's pretty much towards the end. We're still waiting for some of those state games, but, just talk to us a little bit about, some of the things you saw this tournament, things that were special, things that were different, things that you enjoyed, because, even being in Connecticut right now, I saw a lot of coverage as we talked about, and it seemed like a pretty interesting tournament.
Yeah, it's such a whirlwind 9 days for me. I by the end of it, I basically have been sleeping all week just to catch up, and that's how it is. But it's also the most fun week of the year, and it's a chance to see people that, in a lot of cases, you don't see the rest of the year. Some old timers come back, former great players come back. It's more than just a basketball event, I guess, if you will. The basketball itself, Jeff alluded to the fact we didn't really have buzzer beaters to speak of. I did have a couple upsets. I mean, the Falmouth boys losing to Westbrook in that first round,
Right.
I mean, that was stunning to me.
Yeah.
I thought this was the year they were going to break through after losing in the state game 2 years in a row. I thought they were going to go all the way. Certainly get another round or two. So that was a stunning result. And then the Greeley girls upsetting Gray New Gloucester. They had lost them by 42 points just a couple weeks before the tournament. They come out and beat them by 21. And, it's the old adage, you just don't know. It's high school sports. It's teenage kids. You never know on a given day. And, for the most part, when there's a big difference between teams, we do know. And we don't get upsets like that very often. So when you do, it's really remarkable. We don't have the superstars on the guys' side that we've had. Maddie Fitzpatrick is a special player on the girls' side. She's an all-time top 10, maybe top 5 high school girls basketball player in the state of Maine. So to watch her play has been fun. And the way her teammates have really stepped up. She was in foul trouble for half the game against Oxford Hills the other day. Chevers could have easily lost that game. But Ruth Bowles was tremendous, maybe the best game she's ever played. And then the quote-unquote supporting cast came up big, not only on defense, but hitting some big shots too. And that's what you have to have to win a championship. So, Chevers coming into the season, I think people didn't know quite what to make of them. They lost one of their best players to Thornton Academy. They lost 2 other players who had some experience. They moved over to Mount Ararat. So it really was Maddie Fitzpatrick, Ruth Bowles, and a lot of unknowns. So to see that story come together, it's really been a cool story. You got the Brunswick girls on the brink of maybe winning a championship for the first time. They lost in the state game last year, and they've been very driven to get back and to win it this year. I love the history aspect. I mean, I wish I covered Gray New Gloucester just for the fact that I could talk about 1975. Yeah, Gerald Ford was in the White House. It was the year Saturday Night Live debuted as Carlton Fisk became a household name, and that's the last time Gray New Gloucester played in and won a state title, and now they're back. Those kind of stories are fantastic. Gorham and Wyndham, two neighboring towns, 2 rivals that really haven't had much basketball success. Wyndham hasn't had any basketball success at all. And for Gorham, it's been about 2 decades. They're going to be playing in the biggest state game of them all. If you look at the big class boys, that'll culminate everything on Saturday night. So, there's never a shortage of great storylines. For some kids, they might get to play in this tournament one time. And even if they lose by 30, it's still an incredible experience to step on the expo floor, to step on the Augusta Civic Center floor, to step on the Civic Center floor, whatever the case may be. And I think that just permeates, and that's why we're all so drawn to it. It's just a fun event. I wish it was spread out a little bit more just to take it in as a fan instead of just constantly prepping games, covering games, and writing about games. But, I managed to do a little bit of that too. And it's a fun social event, and athletically, I mean, it really is the highlight of the whole school year.
So we have 2. It's very rare for boys and girls to win the same year, but we have 2 chances of it this year. We have Gorham, which again, most people would say the Gorham boys are probably favored. The Gorham girls probably underdogs. You look at Oceanside; those 2 teams are 40-0 combined. What would it say? I think it was 2018. I think it was the last time that we had Edward Little that won both.
Yeah,
and Greeley. Yep. So what do you? What does it mean for a school like that? I mean, taking those 2 separately, obviously, which team do you think has a better chance? And what would it say if we had maybe 2 teams that did in the same year?
Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable. And you look at, I mean, a lot of schools have a strong basketball tradition, even if you have a strong girls and boys. But there's no guarantee you're both going to get it done in the same year. And, Greeley did it. I think Greeley did it back-to-back years when Anna DeWolf was still there, and that boys team had an incredible run. But it is a rarity. And I mean, you look at Oceanside, they probably feel like they should have done it last year because the girls had won the title in 2022, were heavily favored last year, got upset by Spruce Mountain. The boys got to the state game but lost to Orono. So both of those teams are kind of on a mission. I mean, look, there's been no shortage of ink or words spilled on the Oceanside boys this year. Not only how great they are, but some perception of maybe they haven't been as sportsmanlike as they should, and that's a discussion for another time. But it's a great team, and the Galley brothers are terrific players. And unlike last year where they struggled to get through the region, they really had no struggle this time around. Can they beat Orono up in Bangor? It's always hard for a Southern Maine team.
Yeah.
I guess they're not a Southern Maine team, but from not being in that area to have to go up there and win. We'll see. Oceanside girls, they did win a state title up there 2 years ago. So we'll see how that goes. And, I agree with perception on Gorham. I wouldn't write off the Gorham girls, though. It's a very seasoned group. They're very balanced. If they come out and hit some shots and get some early confidence, I think they can play with Chevers. And you look at the state game 2 years ago where Chevers beat them. I didn't even realize this until I went back and researched it. that game was tied at halftime. So it wasn't like Chevrolet ran away with it. Last year Oxford Hills pulled away in the second half and beat Gorham decisively. I don't think this is going to be a blowout by any means. I think with the way Lon Berthium coaches, he's going to keep that team right in their game. And then the boys, if they play their game, they're going to be really tough to beat. But Wyndham, they're a special team too.
Yeah, they just find ways to win. They're not winning by a lot, but they're finding little ways to win.
Right.
Now, you mentioned Lon Berthium, and I want to bring up coaching for a little bit. Obviously, coaching matters. No one denies that. Billy Goodman's been a legend as well. In your job, how important is it to keep that relationship with the coaches? You're not just doing game stories. You're doing preview stories. You're doing games and stories in the middle, and then you're doing stories at the end. How do you kind of keep that line being like, I want to not be your friend, I want to support you, but also your job is to report on it. And if there's something that's not great about the team, sometimes you may have to report on that too.
Yeah, it's part of the job, and it's part of the balancing act. And let's face it, human nature sets in. You really like certain people. You cheer for certain people, certain stories.
Right.
I always like when programs haven't won for a long time and suddenly have success. That's always a favorite story of mine, that kind of thing. And, someone for 20, 25 years, they're going for some kind of record or a first championship in a long time. It's hard not to pull for them, but you can't let that show in your writing. And you try to be as objective as possible. And, one thing that I've really enjoyed in recent years is kind of branching out and getting to know some coaches and athletic directors and teams from schools that aren't necessarily in our coverage area. Thornton Academy, Gorham, Wyndham, places like that, Brunswick, York, Wells, and it gets to the point where I've had several people say, "God, I wish you were covering our teams. I wish I wish we were in your coverage area." That's very flattering. So I feel like I must be doing something right in that case.
We talked a little bit about venues earlier for the tournament. So I want to get two questions. One is, what is your favorite tournament venue to cover? We'll include hockey and basketball. And then outside of that, what is your favorite venue to cover of any sport at any time? Maybe it's a school, maybe it's whatever, just a place that it could be indoor, outdoor, whatever, that just, and maybe it's something to do with popcorn. I don't know, something. So your tournament venue, and then your favorite venue to go overall.
Yeah, well, so as far as tournament, I think the Augusta Civic Center is the best.
Yeah.
You're pulling off the highway. You've got a great big parking lot. You come in, it's a basketball venue. Mm-hmm. It's got a ton of history. It's got a really good snack bar too, as those places go. It's a lot more reasonable than the Civic Center or the Expo. The place oozes history, especially when you get like the smaller schools in there. That don't normally get to play on anywhere near that kind of a stage. And the Expo is special too. Talk about history. That's even older. They've had big events there for the better part of a century. And when that building's full, and it's been pretty full this tournament, and you even hear people talking about, should we have some of the AA early rounds over there? Which I
said that for sure. I love it.
It's just figure out what kind of schedule you can do to make that happen.
Right.
But it's a great venue for basketball. Civic Center, it's a hockey arena. When it's full for a state game, you get some good atmosphere, but really it's not the best venue. And the old Bangor Auditorium was storied for good reason. The new Cross Insurance Center up there, I did a state game up there a couple years ago. Really, really nice venue, but it doesn't have the history of the other places. Covering baseball games at Hadlock Field is kind of cool.
True.
You don't get an opportunity to do that as a high school sports reporter very often, and sit up in the press box and kind of take in the whole thing. And we don't really have like any old special gyms in our coverage area to speak of. There's a lot of newer things, and a lot of the schools are newer. But Hadlock Field for sure. Fitzpatrick Stadium to do state games for football, lacrosse. That's always a big event at the end of the school year, which I always really enjoy. So, those are some of the places that I would say I certainly spend most of my time at and enjoy the most.
Well, we used to do a lot of not recruiting for some Freudian slip there. A lot of scouting for football. We go to a lot of the local ones. Bonnie Eagle has the best popcorn. Yeah. Maybe anywhere. Incredible. Coach Dick Agresti used to always go with us, and he would always try the popcorn, and it was always the best there. So my only one follow-up before Zach goes on here. One thing we talked about as well is there was a story that kind of broke, and it's still happening now. Buying tickets to the Cross Insurance Arena. And these kind of crazy fees. Again, I saw it today. A student $5 student ticket was going to cost about $13 after fees. Do you think is that something that you've seen anywhere else? Is it obviously it's a Ticketmaster thing? It's not like the MPA is trying to gouge anybody, but like that for me, that's so disappointing that and the answer kind of has been like, well, just buy them in person, but that's not always the most feasible either. So what's your reaction to that story when you saw that kind of broke a couple weeks ago?
It's shameful, and honestly, if it were me, I know and we might get to this topic. You had mentioned something about it if I were king for a day or whatever. I'd let the students in for free. And let's get as good a student environment as possible. And you can start by doing that by letting them in for free. And there's still plenty of room to sell a lot of other tickets and make a lot of other money. But no, I mean, this gouging for high school sports, it's embarrassing. It's really unfortunate. And, I hope they can find a way to bypass Ticketmaster altogether. Yeah, I mean, I certainly encourage people to go do it in person if at all possible. Because why would you spend? You're not going to the Super Bowl or Taylor Swift concert. You're going to a high school basketball game. Yeah. So you pay the face value and get it.
Right. Zach?
Yeah, for sure. So before we get into some Patriots talk, as Jeff said, a couple more questions here. So this one's a little more personal, just from me to you. Right now I'm taking a lot of writing classes, a lot of the sports media that I'm doing. The teachers I have, the faculty are hammering this. Got to stay away from bias. You got to watch your bias. And so, as a sports reporter who's done this for so many years, do you find it hard to still deal with bias? When you see these like really interesting stories or teams that you really like to follow, in whether it be high school games or whatever you're covering?
Well, I mean, and like I say, I mean, it really comes back to human nature, and I think you have to be aware of it as you write. But certain things are just going to come across. My writing's kind of enthusiastic and positive, and some people might take it that, I've been accused many times of favoring one community over another. And, that's not ever the intent. Usually it's highlighting the positives of something that one community did as opposed to the other. And then I can think of a lot of other instances where, the community that lost that particular game, I'd probably written a lot of stories that were, very positive as well. And, as sports fans, human nature is, we tend to overreact big time. And oh my God, everyone wants us to lose, and ESPN hates the Patriots, and I'm guilty of it as well.
Well, they do, so that's okay.
Yeah, but I guess that's a different exception. But what I would say is, I mean, if you feel like you're being fair, be true to yourself, to your writing style. If you feel like you're being fair and you can defend that, if someone accuses you of not, I mean, you've got to pull the trigger, and I mean, you can't be paralyzed by the fact that, oh my God, this might be offensive to, one team, one city, one community. If you feel like you're doing your best work, you let it ride.
Moving beyond basketball, we talked a lot about that. What do you think what's the state of Maine high school athletics? There's a lot of talk about participation rates, certainly for football, but even in other sports where, I remember even 10 years ago, there was a freshman JV and a varsity team for pretty much every sport. And now you're lucky to get a first team for something. A sport like girls hockey has co-ops that literally are like 8 schools together.
Yep.
Some of it's just a general, participation issue around the country. Some of it is the Maine's population. What have you seen, talking to coaches and talking to players about? You're always going to have that superstar athlete, but it's that secondary athlete that maybe is not the star. There's some of them are just not choosing to play sports, or they're choosing to specialize. What do you see in the next 5-10 years for Maine high school sports in general?
Well, I mean, it's certainly alarming. I mean, the numbers are what they are, and you can see with your own 2 eyes that, I mean, you look at boys and girls hockey, there are very few standalone programs anymore. It just doesn't happen. And I know hockey's kind of a unique sport, and it's not cheap. Mm-hmm. The equipment's not cheap. You have to travel a lot. You get ice time at 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. It's definitely not for everybody. And as time goes on, I think you've seen some participation numbers kind of dip. But other sports where like field hockey and soccer and things that I think a lot of kids just get disengaged over time if they're not playing, or if they feel like they have to specialize in a certain sport to be able to play in college, and there's so few realistic avenues to that happening. And for every Cooper Flag, there's 1,000 other kids that are never going to play D1 coming from the state of Maine. It's such a rarity, and most kids are better off just staying in their community, having fun with their friends, being kids. And if you're a good athlete, you're going to be discovered. I've always believed that.
Right.
And, maybe something for like if you want to play college hockey, you might need to go prep at some point. But realistically speaking, you can play high school sports and multiple sports, and coaches want multi-sport athletes. You hear this all the time.
Yeah, but the thing that I always wonder, and I don't have any proof of this anecdotally, but there's so much emphasis on winning. And if you're a kid and you have, again, let's go back 30 years before social media, before whatever. If you're an athlete, you play sports, whether your team is good, bad, because you're with your friends. Nowadays, there are so many other distractions. You could do video games. You could do so many other things that I feel like I'm seeing teams that are, if your program is routinely unsuccessful, why are you going to play? If you're going to go out there and you're going to, go 2-12 as a squad, you're not placing that much emphasis on the team camaraderie, especially with football, because you're physically getting beat, right? But even the other sports where I'm saying, like, it's not every program is great. If you're a program that's not even having ebbs and flows, what do you say to a kid like that? That's like, okay, you can either go home and have fun on your own, or you can go, play girls lacrosse and get waxed 20-5 every game. I mean, that's not very fun either. So I don't know how do you convince people that it's still worth, beyond the wins and losses and a potential to go to college, to try out for sports? I don't know, Zach, maybe you have some thoughts too. I mean,
no, I mean, I think it's just, it's like that underlying fact of, like, as you mentioned, sometimes teams are going out here and they're performing 2-12, and they go into the season knowing they're going to perform 2-12. And there's some kids on that team that have that team camaraderie of, like, I'm going to go out and have fun and I'm going to play because I like the sport. And there are other kids that want to win. And so it's, the division between those two different type of athletes on a team is tough. But, I think you wish everybody was there to be there to enjoy the game and to play, whether it's basketball or hockey or football. But that's just not how kids are these days. And I think, there is that division, whatever team it might be, whatever sport it might be. There are kids that are there to have fun, and there are coaches some coaches are there to have fun, and some are there, right. We're going to win because that's what I want to do, is I want to win.
Yeah. How much do you see the support from the athletic departments play a role in that, in the parents groups? Like, when you see a team that's, not, gonna do that well, and maybe it's not a sport that gets a lot of people there anyway. What do you see from the support from the athletic directors? Obviously, you get to interact with a lot of these guys, and how does that help, at least get the team through the season?
Right. I mean, I think that's an imperative part of it, is to try to keep it positive, try to attend as much games as possible to show support. And I mean, let's face it, all the parents groups want kids to be successful.
Right.
So it's really just encouraging. I mean, and you're learning lessons. I know a lot of this is cliche, but if you learn how to overcome adversity at the age of 16, it's going to be very helpful down the road. And you put a lot of work in, and you somehow win a game late in the season that you weren't supposed to. There's a lot of value in that. In some ways, it's as valuable as winning a big game as a favorite. So, I mean, there are lessons, there are values, there are rewards. But and not everyone wants to stick with things, especially in this day and age, and it's unfortunate. And high school sports is just such a wonderful thing for communities, for the growth of the athletes, and I hope it continues long beyond me. But certainly, a lot of these, the fact that the participation is dropping in a lot of these sports is a concern, and I don't know how you turn it around. I think COVID had something to do with that too,
exacerbated it,
but
for
it
sure.
Certainly isn't the only reason. But you have kids that spend a year away from doing something, and they realize, all right, I guess I don't miss it that much. I'll go do something else.
Right.
So that hasn't helped.
Yeah, I'm not talking about, like, don't go do dance, don't do, right. Schools, but we're talking just going home and do nothing. Right. Last kind of question on high school sports before we talk about our glorious Patriots. I mentioned this before. Let's just say that you're crowned king, emperor, whatever you want to say, of all MPA and athletic directors, so you get to control the schools as well. What are 3 things that you're doing tomorrow to make Maine sports even better than it is?
So the first thing I would do is I would go back to the way the basketball tournament used to be, have the big class tournament after all the others, and spread it out and make it last even another week or so. And that way we wouldn't have the AA quarterfinals on campus, which in some case leads to a good atmosphere and good games. But for the most part, it's really not a tournament environment for the kids that are taking it. I'd go back to 4 classes too. Yep. I think, what's the point of making the playoffs if you're 0-18, 1-17? There's really no value in that. Yep. I would separate the baseball, softball, and lacrosse state games are all the same weekend. The weekend before, all we have is the tennis states. Let's bump lacrosse into that slot. They play fewer games than baseball and softball anyway. Then you can have the baseball and softball teams wrap up the school year and the spring sports season. I mentioned the letting the students in for free. That's a big one. I would not schedule any Saturday night games just because I'm selfish and I like to have Saturday nights.
Especially during football season.
Friday night's fine. Yeah. Friday night's good.
Yeah,
Saturday afternoon, and I love Saturday afternoon football. In the fall in Maine, those are great times to have those kind of things. So
yeah, I'm gonna say one, and Zach, I'll have you do one. My one, and I mentioned this to you via text earlier. 100%, and this is about one sport. no overtime in freshman or JV basketball, or really any sport.
Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, I know they're there to get experience, but my Lord, we're already lucky enough these games run on time already.
Yeah.
It's a tight schedule. And
Totally
especially
agree.
now, honestly, like, this is a different thing. Now that all these schools are using huddle focus, right, to do their games, which is a great thing. One of my nervousness about it is, unless someone is watching it all the time, and most ADs are not, they're setting it and forgetting it, which I get that. But they're overrunning, and then you're tuning into a JV game, and it's half of the freshman game. Or, I mean, there was a game early this year at Bon Eagle. The freshman game went to double overtime. Our varsity game didn't start till 8:30 or something at night. It screws up all the huddle stuff. So I say, I'm sorry. And I would also limit their timeouts as well. I'm sorry, like one timeout per half for freshman and JV. There's nothing worse than an 8-point JV game and everyone's calling timeouts after every bucket to try to set up defense.
I hear you.
I get it's a learning curve. I get it, but let's keep it moving. Zach, do you have one that if you were king for a day?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about, and I think we all agree on this, but I would have more AA games in the Expo. I think it's a better atmosphere than the Cross Insurance Arena, which I worked for the Mariners. It feels like home to me. I love that arena, but the Expo is just better for basketball. And especially because it's Class AA, where you get a lot of fans, you get a lot of people in, and you get these really big matchups. I feel like they're almost like wasting away an opportunity to really like show how big Maine basketball can really be in the playoffs. And I know that, like, scheduling wise, they'd have to do a whole change for that, but I feel like that's something they could actually do. Like, if they actually wanted to, they could get AA there. So
because there's a whole month off between it's not like the fall where there's no time between the end of the football season and basketball season. You have a month to play with, basically, so they could definitely push that. So I think that's a good one there.
For sure.
We have a couple more minutes with you here, and I just want to talk about the Patriots. You're a diehard Patriots fan. We're not gonna rehash last year because we're behind it. If you're Elliott Wolf, Caleb Williams goes number 1, Drake May goes number 2. What are you doing with the number 3 overall pick?
Oh, it's so tough. I keep going back and forth on this because I don't feel like any of these guys are just, slam dunk. I do like Jaden Daniels of he or May. I think I would opt for him, but also, I mean, passing up on a once in a generation sure thing wide receiver like Harrison, I guess it's a good problem to have. I mean, you've got a couple tough choices there. You got to hit on the quarterback if you're going to pick a quarterback, and I feel like they probably do need to go in that direction. But I just don't know. I mean, I don't watch a lot of college football, so I don't feel as confidently as some people that I saw Caleb Williams play a couple times. I really wasn't that impressed with him, and you hear some things about off the field with him, and it doesn't sound like he'll be in play for the Patriots anyway. But I don't know.
It's hard.
I mean, you probably go quarterback, but I could make a strong case.
Daniels right now is like the odds-on favorite if you look at the draft.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't watch too much college football, but I mean, he won the Heisman obviously, but he did not play well against the great teams, and he's just a small guy. Like, he's not small like Kyler Murray, but he's thin, right? So yeah, you can bulk up. The problem is, again, when you look at all these guys, you just don't know how they're going to translate. You look at Drake May; he didn't look that great at times, but again, he's playing with not great. He's playing in North Carolina, not the greatest players. What general offseason? I mean, what are you thinking about Gerard Mayo? Not so much the coach, and my big sticking point isn't that they picked Gerard Mayo; it's that they didn't even interview anybody else. This is 100% on Kraft. If it does not work out, he should be ashamed because he didn't even look at anybody else. So, what are your thoughts on the coaching staff, Gerard Mayo? Not so much Bill leaving, but who they picked to replace him.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that Gerard Mayo turns into a great coach, and I hope that Kraft was ahead of the curve and he saw something and he turned out he was right, just like he was when he brought Belichick in all these years ago. You just don't know. I mean, he's a great motivator. I think he's going to be he's going to make for better press conferences for what that's worth. But we just don't know.
Right.
And a lot of these coaching hires have kind of been underwhelming. And again, maybe these are the right guys. We just don't know. I mean, this is going to be a 3-year process, probably.
Right.
They're probably not a playoff team next year. Although if the Texans could have done it last year, I always say if the Pats can get the right quarterback, why can't they go 9-8 next year and maybe make a playoff run? But realistically, there's so many holes to fill on offense. I mean, the defense is in pretty good shape, but you've got it. The receiving core, not just getting a number 1.
Right.
I mean, they really need several receivers. The line has so many holes. And then you've got to hit on the quarterback, and that's just not something you're going to do in one draft and one free agency cycle.
Right.
So, I mean, they've missed on a lot of draft picks over the years. They can't afford to miss on any right now. They've got to hit, and they've got to hit on these free agent signings, whatever they do. I don't think it'll be like a couple of years ago where they throw in $200 million out there.
Right.
And a lot of that money wasn't good money either. So
ticket prices went up a couple percent too, which is absurd.
Really?
I just got the document. I got to pay, and it's like, oh, by the way, I have to pay in 5 days, but it's another $500 a season. So, Zach, any final questions here as we wrap up?
Yeah, so just one more quick thought. I saw this today. I don't know if have you seen the ratings from the end of the year player surveys that the Patriots had?
Yes, I did.
So for those who don't know, they were 29th overall out of all NFL teams, but the biggest one, the players ranked the treatment of families an F-. I just want to see your thoughts on the F-, which, like, at that point they're just trying to throw wood to the fire there just to show like how mad they are about that.
Well, and it's funny because, I mean, the Crafts, they come across as this big family friendly. I mean, it's a family business how hard is it to have a decent room to take care of kids and have a decent food spread, or, I don't know what all that entails, but I mean, that's obviously, you've got a lot of players who are really upset about this, and they're letting it be known. It's $1 billion industry. You're raking in so much money. Just treat the players and their families and their kids. You don't even have to spend that much money to do it, I don't think. So hopefully it's an eye opener, because it's a big black eye for the team, honestly.
And something that really you wouldn't think had anything to do with Bill either, right? That's a Bob Kraft thing. A lot of this stuff.
I think so.
Last question here is we appreciate your time today. Is just in general, we talked a lot about media, changing the landscape of the media. What do you say to somebody like Zach, like we have Cole Purvis here, a lot of guys who want to go into sports media? Like, the podcasting route is obviously an attractive route. It's very hard to make money off it, obviously, or trying to be an influencer on Instagram. But if you want to be a TV reporter, a writer, I mean, try to talk people off the ledge and why they should just be like, it's just not even worth it anymore.
Well, I disagree, because I think there's still an audience for it. And good writing, good broadcasting, good announcing, I think there's always going to be a home for something like that. I mean, the odds probably aren't great, and I don't even know if there are traditional journalism schools to speak of anymore. Most of it's gone video in that direction, but people are always going to want to read about this stuff, and they're always going to want to. Maybe the media is not what it used to be, but the desire for information in the sports world is insatiable.
Right.
And that stuff just doesn't come out of nowhere. It's got to come from people that are talented, that are knowledgeable. And I feel like if you're passionate about something, and I would say this, whatever course of life, follow your heart, follow your passion, and it will come across when you're trying to find a job. And it's just finding that niche, finding that thing that you do maybe better than other people, or more than others. A lot of it's just treating people the right way and showing up. I mean, these are really basic things, but they're important. They were important 25 years ago when I was trying to figure this out. They're important now. They always will be. And, I would always encourage someone, to follow your heart and follow your passion as long as you can.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Michael Hoffer. We're going to have definitely on as a recurring guest here, especially as the sports season ramp up.
Yeah,
I appreciate your thoughts on it, and we'll catch us down the road.
Awesome. I enjoyed doing it and love to do it again.
Awesome.
We again want to thank Michael Hoffer for coming on. Great talk as always, and you'll probably be seeing him back on here, throughout upcoming episodes, which is great to see.
We'll call him a recurring guest. He'll be back on from time to time. Once the winter sports season's over, he takes a very well deserved, pretty much a month off before the spring season starts. But we'll definitely have him on during the spring season to talk about that, and maybe the NFL drafts. And see, obviously, he's a big Patriots fan.
Yeah, interesting Patriots draft.
We'll talk. We have a long time to talk about that. Don't worry.
Of course. So to finish up this first episode, coming to close very quickly, we have another interesting segment that Jeff, you came up with, which I thought was a great idea, and it is very simply called "Take of the Week" that has nothing to do with sports. So Jeff and I are both going to give a take that has nothing to do with sports. I don't know if I'd say hot take. It might
Mine's
be
a hot take.
We'll see. But Jeff, why don't you go first, and then we'll dive into your take.
Yeah. So I recently went to Florida for a week for vacation. We had school vacation here last week, and I also flew on a plane. Flying on a plane and being in an airport is really, you find out a lot about humanity, how people react to stress situations, how good they are at preparing. going to Florida is very challenging. There's always a lot of elderly folks, people who don't fly very often. So you're already dealing with that in terms of getting on the plane, getting off the plane. There's so many things outside of our control about waiting on the tarmac and all this other things that we can't control. But as people, as passengers, we can control some things.
Yes.
And my hot take is I'm hot taking a hot take. Okay. There's a hot take out there that like, oh, a lot of memes on X and Instagram. Oh, good job, guy who stood up as soon as the plane got to the gate. Only another 10 minutes before he get off. Idiot, right? Which I understand. I'm usually an aisle seat guy. I'm a tall guy. I'm like 6'1". I'm almost always an aisle seat guy. So am I a stand-upper? Not really. If I'm in the front top, the top 5 rows or 10 rows, or if I have a very quick connection, yeah, I'm going to jump up and grab my bag. If I'm near the middle I'm usually near the middle. This one I happened to be in the back because I booked the flight like a week before. So I was way back. And I'm sorry, but standing up is not the worst thing you can do at the end of a flight. The worst thing you can do at the end of the flight is not be ready to get your crap and get off the plane, especially when you're in row 30. We've already sat there for 10 minutes. We're waiting on people. And even if you don't have a quick, a turnaround, layover, but the people who are just like, oh, they're like, oh, it's our turn. Okay, let me get up. Okay, and then now I need to look for my bag. Even though I put this bag in there 2 hours before, not a day before, you forget which bin it's in. Okay, or maybe it's super heavy. And I'm not making fun of people who can't lift their bag, but like, show a little hustle. Like, we're all tired, especially for short flights. We want to get the heck out of here. So my hot take is standing up is totally fine. I have no problem standing up. I would rather have you stand up next to me, early than, I had one of the situations where we're all just kind of standing there. And like, there's 2 rows that some people were kind of like half ready to get up. And then they just slowly like, oh, do you want to go? And I just booked it. Now, I didn't have a bag in the overhead, but I'm like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but if you want to help people with their bags, fine. And if you're in the middle window seat, I'm sorry, you got to show a little extra hustle. I know you've been stuck in there for a while. You haven't been able to get out, but just because you're on the inside doesn't mean you should take a minute to get up, look back at your seat. Oh, did I forget my iPod? Did I forget my what? No. Get up and get out of the plane. That is my hot take. Standing up, I'm totally fine with. It means we all get off the plane a little bit faster. Some people are just hopeless for the whole plane experience, and you just got to shake your head and say, get out of the aisle, just get in there. But for me, it was landing and standing there after the 29 rows ahead of me have gone and still being like, why aren't you ready to go? Come on, man. Figure it out. That's my hot take. Standing up, not as bad as people say.
Yeah, it has. I agree. It has to be more organized. It's always. I think. I like almost 100% agree. I definitely think getting up early is totally fine. I think if you're getting up early, like as the plane is coming in, with the intention of like I'm gonna walk to the front, maybe you need to rethink that. But standing up, I agree, and it's like it's just like chain reaction where what you explained with like people not being ready a row in front of you, that happens at the front and then
everywhere.
Back a little more. It's
everywhere.
Everybody. It's
everybody. They're not ready to go. Get ready. Let's get out of here. We've been stuck here for hours. What are you thinking about?
Especially long flights. It's you're right. It's baffling how some people are just like. They're like, I'm just going to sit and wait and let's just see where this goes. And when the person in front of me starts to walk, let me get up and let me look at
it should be at least a 5 row. When you're within 5 rows, it's go time. Get your stuff out of it. Make sure you're ready to go. Grab your bag and just jet for it. Like you can put your jacket on when you get into the jet bridge. Let's go, baby.
100%. Totally agree. It's
frustrating. I just got to go first class, I guess, to be at the front.
Yeah, but then let's be honest. Let's be really honest. Even with the extra room, even with people, in the front there, it's probably still going to happen. It's probably still going to happen.
People are. Yep, it's bad.
It's bad.
What's your hot take?
So mine. I don't think it's a hot take. I think it's a very common take. But I'm very adamant about this. So I had a recent experience. I'll talk about it. People should not be clapping after movies in a movie theater. And honestly, this goes into airplanes too. It happens. People clap after it, which is even worse. I can't even go into that. But I went to go see the new Bob Marley movie. Even though I'm at school, I went over the weekend, watched a movie, and somebody clapped afterwards. And I'm in a normal, just like local movie theater, or whatever. I think it's called there's a Cinemax, which actually is more chain, but still. And I'm thinking to myself like, who are you clapping for? Who are you clapping for? If you are not at a premiere where the directors are there, where the people who produce the movie are there, where the actors are there, clap. They do clap after premieres because they're there, because the people that made the movie, the great movie that you just watched, are there. But like, I don't care if this is the most groundbreaking movie you've ever seen in your life. Don't clap. Think to yourself, that was an awesome movie. Grab your stuff and walk out. People clapping is horrible. The worst I've ever heard, the ones where I was actually furious, was after Avengers Endgame a couple years ago and the sequels to Star Wars. The whole theater's clapping. I'm like, oh, whoop-de-doo. The Marvel series is over. It sucks. I'm a huge Marvel fan. It sucks that it was over. I don't need to clap. They're not there. Robert Downey Jr. is not in the front row. These guys that made the movie are not sitting on the side. They're not watching it on you. No, just walk out. Think to yourself, that was awesome. That was the best movie. Go write a review. Go on Rotten Tomatoes. Go on X. Go on Instagram. Say, that was the best movie I've ever seen. I don't care. The clapping, I don't know why it infuriates me so, but it just, gosh, there's no reason for it. There's no reason for it.
So I tend to agree. I always think if it's something you're not going to do at your home, why would you do it? I've never sat in my house watching a great movie and clapped by myself sitting in a room. So I don't do that. There is something worse though than clapping at the end of the movie. Clapping in the middle of a movie.
Ooh. True.
So I didn't see Avengers Endgame in the theater, but I've seen so many videos of when all the Avengers come out at the near the end to fight the last battle. Now when I was at home, and I'm not a huge Marvel guy. I was like, oh my gosh, and I was kind of but if I'm in a theater and that happens, and you see a 15 to 20 second people of yelling, screaming, cheering, whatever, I'd be so mad. I'd be like, be quiet. I've been in theaters before where I'm trying to think, I can't think of an example where people have hollered out during a movie, and it's just dude, this is not the time. Just control yourself. So
it's not about you. That's the biggest thing. It's that's the best point. Is when all the Avengers come out. That happened too at the same time. It's not about you. I want to hear. I missed that line, and maybe it was the best line of the movie because you thought, oh, I need to cheer right now for whatever movie it is. But
at least if you clap at the end of a plane ride, which I agree is not great either, at least you're like, hey, we survived. We just went into 40,000 feet going 580 miles an hour in a death tube, and somehow we landed on the ground in one piece. I would never do it. I've seen it a couple times, but only when it's the weather's really bad, and But when I have a pilot friend, and he's like, most of the landings are the same no matter what, and they don't really care about the clapping. But it's just kind of I feel again on the airplane, sometimes you find the lowest forms of humans and just see what they really are. It's just clapping on a plane for me. If they want to clap, as long as that means they're getting up out of their seat to get to their bags, I'm good.
That's the best point. If you're clapping as you're in the motion of standing,
I'm all right, we'll grab that. All right, good job, man. Let's go. Let's wrap it up.
Yeah, that's classic. The best part. But so I think we started off with our takes very well. I have got more in the bag. I've got so.
Oh, that's good. This is gonna be the easiest segment every week.
Oh my
I got a lot of stuff.
There's just so many things. It's really just gonna be you and me just ranting about the stuff that we just hate to see, and whatever it might be. But yeah, that'll do it for the first episode of the Maine Rundown. I had a great time, and as always, we're going to be hopefully uploading once a week, maybe a little bit more. We'll see how this goes, but I don't know about you, Jeff. I'm really excited to keep this going and get some great guests on. It's going to be a fun ride, and we have a lot to talk about. Even though we're in that, I feel like we're in that part of the year where the winter sports, professional sports, are starting to end. You get really only the baseball. I think we got a lot to talk about and a lot of great topics. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, it is. And one last thing, we didn't really talk about at the top of the show, but where the name of the show came from, actually, it's a kind of a second time around for the Maine Rundown. So when I worked at WPXT and WPME up in Westbrook shortly after college, we had a high school sports show, a weekly show called the Maine Rundown with my buddy Chris Sedanka, who we're definitely going to have on as a guest at some point. He works at WBLM now, and also Sarah Parlin, we produced a show and hosted it. We did about 130 unique episodes, so that was really cool. 130, yeah, a lot. So I was producer, host, a little everything. It got me into the business and got me to learn how to do video editing and everything else. So great time there. So that's where the namesake comes from. The Maine Rundown was Maine's official high school sports show. But now, it's been defunct for about 10 years now. So I think we'll take the name here for the podcast. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it, and we'll certainly we'll get Zach a new camera eventually to step it up. But otherwise,
Yeah,
We'll,
that's the one. That's what we're gonna need at some point.
Yeah.
Is
Otherwise,
we got the mic. We got the mics. Your camera's phenomenal. Mine just needs a little bit of bumping up. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. But we'll see you next week.
Yeah, you can find the Maine Rundown on all your favorite podcast platforms as well as YouTube. The video will be up, and also hopefully be posting, some content, some best moments from episodes, just funny moments, whatever we can find. We want to push that out there. You can follow the Maine Rundown on Twitter or X, I should call it. I'm so used to.
Let's call it
Twitter.
X. Let's
call it X, and Instagram and YouTube on Maine Rundown Pod. But again, thank you all for listening. For Jeff Christian, Barry, I'm Zach Tarenka, and we will see you all next week.